What impact do you
Thank
think
you.
the US ceasefire veto will have on the conflict and efforts for peace? Even China has said that this latest US veto is tantamount to giving the green light for continued killing.
The U.S. Veto, and there have been several of them, has been intended to keep the UN from adopting, the Security Council from adopting something that could be seen as one-sided and which may jeopardize Israeli participation in sensitive negotiations. But as we've seen, the U.S. is coming up with an alternative resolution which calls for a temporary ceasefire as soon as practicable, and that's a little bit vague in timing. That's going to be an issue. But the U.S. resolution is putting more pressure on Israel, and this is something that's the Israelis may not have expected, but it's a steady ratcheting up of quiet pressure on Israel.
As you say, it's very vague, and unfortunately, the pressure on Israel from the United States does nothing. Isn't Washington complicit in extending the suffering of Palestinians as a result of failing to call for a ceasefire, Bill?
The number of Palestinians who've been killed in the Israeli action has been so high that certainly in the United States there are concerns of the kind you mentioned. But on the other hand, the brutality of the Hamas strike on October 7 was so stark that there's a lot of sympathy for Israel's being able to root out the Hamas evil, if you will. But this perception is causing the United States to shift away from, let's say, unadulterated support of Israel. It's having a big impact here, including in the electoral politics.
Indeed, and that's critical as we head towards the November election. Bill, when it comes to finding a pathway forward here, the Middle East envoy Brett McGurk is the latest American in the region, now meeting with policymakers in Israel and elsewhere to try and come up with a solution. What needs to happen now to secure the release of these hostages and to stop the bloodshed in Gaza before Israel's Ramadan deadline?
So the goal of negotiations is partially to obtain hostage release, but it's also to find a way to reduce the threats to the Palestinians and try to find some possible ways to move forward on a path to peace. So that's a complicated arrangement. More complicated than it would be, for example, if hostages were not an issue. So Brett McGurk is trying in Israel and in Egypt to find a pathway forward. The Egyptians are reluctant to take large numbers of Palestinians who might be expelled from Gaza if the Israelis mount a full-scale assault on Rafah, where 1.5 million or so Palestinians are held. So that's a key issue as well.